discussing the space economy, artificial intelligence, or cyber vulnerability, and just continuing the conversation that we have to do it as a team, we have to do it together and go through this journey together. So, Cantor thanks you, Ms. Jones. At this time, we're going to have a remote keynote address that's going to come to us from Mr. Ayush Bharat, Chief Business Development Officer of the Bankai Group representing the Caribbean. Is Ayush ready?
Yes.
We're ready.
Good morning, everyone.
Another round of applause. Let him hear you wherever he is.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, CANTO, for allowing me to speak today and join this conference remotely. My team is already on the ground at CANTO. Unfortunately, I couldn't travel, but I'm glad to be amongst you this morning. And like my colleague said, hope you all had a great evening yesterday and wishing you a great day ahead. Coming to my topic today, I am going to touch base on a very um, retro topic these days among the carriers, which is the voice business. The agenda is global partnerships and interconnects in the Caribbean, exploring the importance of partnerships, interconnect agreements, and peering arrangements in the international voice ecosystem. International voice since the 90s has been the oil of the carrier industry, as we say. However, since 2009, we have seen a trend that the traffic has been depleting. Voice traffic is not that great. We have seen the decline in the voice minutes. But let me tell you, until 2014, the voice traffic has been on a year-on-year rise. 2014, the global voice market clocked about 556 billion minutes. Post 2014, we have seen a decline in the voice industry by 4%, 6.2%, 7.2% until 2020. 19 pandemic in the initial phases spurred the international traffic a little bit, but then again, it went down on the same trend. Come 2021, we saw a further dip of traffic by 6.1%. And in 2022, we stood at somewhere around 335 billion voice minutes. But by 2022, all of us in the carrier industry had believed already that the loss of traffic because of the OTT penetration and all those things is very high. The telcos started to lose interest. The carriers started to lose interest. And, the telcos ran towards, more of data business. The carriers ran towards A2P monetization. The process, we all forgot that voice is still one of the key communication tools that we have. The market since 2022 has been pretty stable, 335 billion minutes globally. Now, voice carrier market, according to our studies and taking references from telegeography and the others, has already lost whatever volume we had to the OTTs. It's stable. It needs consolidation at this point in time. It needs attention from the telcos, MNOs in the room, the telecom regulators in the room, and the carriers like ourselves to come together and make sure that we manage the voice business correctly. What happened is between 2014 and 2022, due to the market news about the decline of voice traffic, most telcos lost interest in the voice business. As I said, carriers started to move towards new business, which is A2P monetization, messaging, and this created a significant void in the voice market globally. Now coming to Caribbean specifically, Caribbean in 2022 represented about 7.6 billion voice minutes inbound and about 4.3 billion minutes of outbound traffic, with a total population size of just over 44 million people. This is not a small number. Let me take an example of Haiti. Between 2021 and 2022, the total inbound traffic in Haiti was about 126 million minutes. This figure hasn't changed, hasn't declined ever since. The outbound traffic did go down a little bit, which clocked at about 910 million minutes annually. Now, many of you would say that the outbound got impacted due to the OTTs, but much to this popular belief, contradicting it, it is not dropped because further after 2022, because of any data penetration, OTTs, digitalization, that loss has already been done. It is because of the lack of focus of the carriers and the MNOs in the market that this problem persists today in 2024 as well. Now, that is the main topic of today's conversation with you all. Our telecom ecosystem needs these three entities to come together. For telcos, I understand that your 90 to 95% of your revenue is your domestic retail business. This leaves about 5 to 10% of your total international revenues at stake. Hence, many of you may not focus on this business. But let us take inspiration from the modern day messaging deals happening between A2P monetization of between telcos, OTTs, and carriers. If we work in this manner together, today all the telcos are using multiple carriers, because of which there is no accountability on any carrier to focus on growing the voice traffic. This voice traffic growth can happen because there is an issue with the connectivity. Let me give you an example. Let's say today you land at JFK in New York, and just walk around to the mom and pop stores around there on the Van Wyck or wherever, and try to buy in from any of the mom and pop store a calling solution to call back home to Caribbean. You will find very limited options, which has bulk of A to Z rates and all those things, or you won't find a solution. So the challenge now from OTTs has shifted to the availability of reaching the end customer. Today, like from Asia or India, there are lots of migrants from the Caribbean in the US-Canada belt. These people, they have connectivity to 4G, 5G in the States. But when we come to the rural areas in the Caribbean, we have a pretty much similar demographics like we have here in the Asian countries or India. The availability of 2G and 3G is limited. Forget getting onto LTE and 5G. Because of this, the data connectivity between US and Caribbean islands is very limited. So the migrants are still struggling to call back home in a lot of cases. Even if you go to the MNOs in any of the emerged markets, the calling rates are so high that one is not able to make regular call back home. We all come from very affluent telecom families. So we think, oh, today using any OTT, it is very simple to call back home. But we have to think about the bulk of population who resides still, be it the Caribbean, be it the Asian market. The bulk of population still resides in the rural areas where connectivity is limited. So my suggestion and the discussion topic is, let's say the telcos, instead of having 7, 8, 10, 15 carriers, boils down to one or two carriers and gives them the baton to grow the voice traffic, to create connectivity, to reach out to the end subscribers. Three main calling sources exist in the market: your migrant community, business to business callers, and travelers. Roaming is again a high cost calling pattern. People still rely on using the data calls. If we are able to address all these three markets correctly, work with telcos in each of the island, and reach out to these markets, I still believe that the voice business can see an upward trend or at least sustain itself very strongly. So that is, our suggestion, our plead to all of you to give some time out of your busy schedule to look at the voice business, to save this industry, which has been one of the main sources of international business income to the telcos over the years. Bankai Group, which I represent, has done similar use cases in Africa, in the Pacific, in Asian countries. And we are here today at booth 11. If you would like to come and understand more or discuss this, we are very happy to have a chat with you all. With this, I close my topic for the day. And once again, thank you very much, everyone, for spending time to listen to me. And hope if this makes sense to you, we would be happy to work as an industry, not just for business between Bankai and you, but overall as an industry. I have been in this industry for over 19 years, and I still strongly feel for the voice business. So that's all from my end. Thank you, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you very much, Ayush Bharat, for quite a bit of food for thought. 10 years ago, when we would have come to CANTO, the voice business, we were talking a lot more about the voice business, how we would save the voice business. Now we're talking about data, we're talking about AI. But I join your movement, Ayush, save the voice business. I have a 21-year-old nephew, and the only time my phone rings with a call from him is when he's begging money. Only time. He messages me to say, I can see you. And I'm thinking, I can't because I can barely read from my phone. But when he calls, no, there's a money request coming up. So at this time, we move to the discussion on GSMA mobile investment gaps, the Caribbean Islands report, and that will be delivered by Paul Castells, Head of Economic Analysis, the GSMA Intelligence. Paul, are you ready? Oh, please give him a proper CANTO welcome.
Do we have a clicker to move slides? Well, hello everyone. Great pleasure to be here today. Many thanks to CANTO for giving us the opportunity to launch this new study today here in the conference. Mobile investment gaps in the Caribbean. That's been a big effort by GSMA and mobile operators, our members in the region. Awesome. All right. The main objective of this study is really to provide an evidence-based assessment of the state of digital inclusion in the Caribbean islands. And we don't stop there. We take a photograph of how the key metrics stand, and then we look towards 2030, and we look at digital transformation targets. And we do an exercise which we call the calculation of the investment gap, which essentially involves estimating the effort, the investment required to reach those targets by 2030. And then we compare that versus what the market can realistically deliver on its own right, as in profitably. And we calculate the difference, and that's the gap. let's take a look first, though, at the key trends. Can you hear me if I move? I don't know. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll go back there. It's okay. It's okay. I won't move. It's fine. I'll stay here put. Sorry, I'll go back. Right. So taking first a look at where we stand today when it comes to internet connectivity in the region. So what we have seen in the last few years has been steady progress, positive progress. However, as the end of 2023, we did still have about half of the population without connecting to the internet. When we then look at what constitutes that gap, there is a small coverage gap, as in people living in areas which are not covered by networks. That's about 3% of the population in the Caribbean islands. But then most of that gap, which we call the usage gap, which constitutes 46% of the population, that is people that actually lives in areas that are covered by mobile internet networks but are not connecting to the internet. The other big trend, and what's starting to happen in the region, is the arrival of 5G. And we have seen in some countries, some operators launching 5G, but it's very, very early days. That is problematic, not rolling out 5G at the same pace as other countries, other regions, because 5G can be a key enabler of digital transformation, economic growth, productivity growth, and prosperity eventually for citizens. So what are the key other trends going on? So when we look first at, sorry, go back one slide. No, sorry. Okay. It's working. I can move. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Significant data traffic growth. Last year, the average data traffic per connection went from 2 gigabytes per month per connection to 3 gigabytes. So that's a 50% growth in 1 year. That growth is going to continue going forward. So if we look at the period in the next 5-6 years to 2030, these 3 gigabytes will become 15 gigabytes by 2030. So if we do the maths, that's essentially multiplying by 5 the capacity that is required in the network. And that obviously generates costs. There's a need to invest to provide this additional capacity. Where is that data traffic growth coming from? Well, we were able to do an exercise with, again, our members in the region. I think for the first time we can present what's been happening most recently, so at the end of 2023. And what we see is quite clear. I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone. What we see is essentially two companies, in this case Meta and Google, generated about half of all traffic in mobile networks in the Caribbean. And then if we expand that to the top 4 large traffic generators, which basically involves bringing TikTok as well as Netflix into the picture, they did generate between these 4 companies 70% of all traffic in mobile networks in the region. That also happens with a very particular characteristic, which is that these large traffic generators are not facing any price signal for the cost that this generates on the access network, which can, in theory, give rise to market failure in the form of free riding or in the form of what's called the tragedy of the commons. So there's a few users which use up all the capacity of the network to the detriment of everyone else, including consumers. So that's on the cost side. The other big thing that I think, again, that shouldn't come as a surprise, other big trend going on is on the revenue side in the last few years. And the key trend there has been the flattening of revenues by telco operators. So we've seen a very much flat line that's been essentially driven by a decline in the unit price of data. It's been declining at a rate of 15 to 20% year on year. And that's essentially led to this, as we can see on the right of this chart, a very much flattish revenue line for telco operators. That's in contrast to the trends that we have seen on the content and application provider side. So during that same period, they have increased their revenues almost threefold, as we can see there. So far that's the photography, that's the data. This is what the evidence shows. What we then did, as I described at the beginning, so we did this exercise of looking towards 2030. What are the digital inclusion and digital transformation objectives that most of the governments in the region have? And then we did this quantitative assessment. I think it's the first time that's been done in the region, almost base station by base station, municipality by municipality, to see where the market will take us. And the conclusion is that we do see a significant gap. There's a 3.5 billion investment gap, which is made up of three components. So there is the 4G coverage gap, that's about 600 million. That would be to expand from where the market will actually get by 2030 to 99%, which is quasi-universal connectivity. We then looked at the 4G usage gap, so getting to 90% usage as a proportion of all population, which basically covers everyone, excluding small children. And then we also looked at the 5G investment gap, which would essentially mean bringing all countries, all islands in the region at similar levels as of those leading 5G investment in the region right now. Then finally, and that's the last part of the study, we asked ourselves the question of what do we do, right? So there's this gap. We are not on track to meet these objectives of digital transformation. What can be done? So there's, option one, I guess, it's accepting the fate. We will not get there. That's one option. Option two would be public sector spending our way out of this by the public sector coming in and throwing large amounts of money into this 3.5 billion. That's undesirable. So there's a huge opportunity cost in public sector spending. So money that goes into digital infrastructure doesn't go into schools, it doesn't go into health. It needs to be raised from somewhere anyway. So that would mean increasing taxes or increasing debt levels. So that's ideally not the first option to try. But we think there's a third way. And the third way is changing market conditions so that both the supply of telecoms and the demand of telecoms can increase, can be boosted, and see if some of that gap can be reduced, bringing more connectivity and more digital transformation. There are 4 areas that we considered. 3 are here. The fourth one is spectrum management, which we didn't quantify because of how different it varies from country to country. So it was quite tricky to come up with a regional view. So we left that out of the quantitative assessment. But we looked at 3 areas. So the first one goes back to this question of data traffic growth. And we considered what would happen if we could get to a point where more commercial arrangements between large traffic generators and ISPs come into place that lead to a more efficient use of the network. That's one area that we looked at. The second one is what we call the normalization of the fiscal treatment of the mobile sector. So that means treating connectivity, the use of connectivity, and the production of connectivity as any other service and good, which unfortunately is not the case in many countries of the region where it's being taxed at a higher level. And finally, we looked at one step further, which is looking at the demand stimulation for the lowest income groups that are currently not connecting to the internet, don't have handsets, and in this case, we'll be exempting them from VAT. And actually, that's an interesting one. It has been tested and tried in some countries with some degree of success. And the idea there is that you're not losing any fiscal revenues because these citizens are not connecting to the internet anyway. They are not paying for data traffic. They are not buying handsets. But then by reducing the cost of that, you are actually making a big difference to the affordability of access. So we looked at these 3 areas, and the results of the modeling exercise of applying this scenario are here. The headline is that we did find a very significant reduction in the total investment gap by introducing these market reforms. So we reduced this 3.5 billion gap by 1.5 billion. So we are not quite there yet, but we did make a big improvement. So looking at, say, 4G coverage, With these reforms, they would be reduced by 2030 from 5% to just 2%. The 4G usage gap, which as we saw has been the main challenge, would reduce very, very significantly from 43% to just 25%. And we would also see a significant reduction in the pace of deployment or a faster deployment of 5G in the region. Here's my penultimate slide. This is just a summary of what I just covered. Key message to take away is that based on the evidence and this assessment, we are not on track to get to the digital transformation objectives by 2030, but significant improvements and progress can be made if some market reforms are introduced that can boost both supply and demand. And with that, I'll please ask you to take your cameras out. In those QR code, you'll find the report. It's been published this week. Please take a look and hope you enjoy the read. Thank you very much.
Well, that presentation really had us thinking, and we can see how many people wanted to download that report because, a moment. Okay. Oh, but the great thing too is that when you go over to the exhibition area at the GSMA booth, you'll be able to get the QR code and other information from the GSMA. So please visit the GSMA booth. And Paul talked to us about the 50% of our population is without coverage, and we're looking at a 3.5 billion investment gap in 4G coverage, 4G usage, and 5G investment, and much thought to consider that at this time, without market reform, we will not be on track to meet 2030 goals with coverage. So this is quite a bit for us to discuss at CANTO, and our next panel is actually going to get into the discussion of achieving the gigabit society's infrastructure investment sustainability. But before our next panel comes up, we want to just give a round of applause to our sponsors. Cable and Wireless Communication, our headline sponsor. Can I get a bigger round of applause for our headline sponsor, because we want them back again for 2025 in the Bahamas. Our gold sponsor, Brava, and We Solve It CX. Our silver sponsors, Bankai Group and Digicel. And our bronze sponsors, Alive, Mavenair, and Solution Box. Please give them a round of applause. So at this time, we welcome first our keynote presenter, Rosalind Layton of Strand Consulting. And I'm also going to invite our moderator and panelist from this session, Lisa Agard, CANTO C9 Committee Chair. Priscilla Honoria Evangelista, Manager, Economic Monitoring Issues, Anatel. CANTO, another round of applause, please. Thank you. Dr. Patrick Antwine, CEO, CPSO. And we will be joined remotely by Miguel Calderon, Regional Director of Public Policy, Strategy and Positioning from Telefonica. But at this time, let us welcome our keynote speaker, Rosalind Layton of Strand Consulting.
Good morning, everyone. Great. Just hope to get a presentation teed up. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, it's such an honor to present today. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, GSMA, for that great kickoff to look at the gap for mobile networks in the Caribbean. I'm going to talk about the fixed line gap and fiber to the home and this larger effort underway with the Caribbean Gigabit Society. Thank you. So just briefly, why do we need gigabit networks in the Caribbean. What is the gap, and what does it cost to close it? So when we talk about a gigabit Caribbean, we're talking about 100 megabit to every home and every enterprise. And what are the reasons that we need these kind of networks? Well, first of all, social services, healthcare, working from home, learning from home, all of the things that we need to do to be a society together, that encompasses all of that. Our government services, news, disaster management, hurricane response, and so on. Also, economy and jobs. There are many exciting companies here at CANTO. I've talked to people running call centers. There's enterprises engaged in smart manufacturing, energy sector, green manufacturing, and so on. They too need gigabit networks. They want to compete globally. We have here in the Western Hemisphere tremendous economic growth. We don't need to outsource it to other hemispheres. It can stay here. There's a labor force here. There's human capital here. We want to make sure that the enterprise and people of this region have the best networks. So in undertaking this study, Strand Consult collected data from the members of the C9 from 21 countries in the Caribbean. And this is the area that our study covered. And so what did we learn? Well, these operators cover about 20 million people. They have over 13 million mobile subscribers. They have over 1.6 million fixed line subscribers, fiber. And the operators indicated that they could actually address 3 million more, but for certain obstacles, which we'll talk about in a moment. So our true gap in subscribers is about 1.3 million. So let's dig into that a little bit. So when we talk about the broadband, this gigabit gap, we have, of course, the fixed subscribers that we know. We have about 1 billion for whom we can't get the networks there for whether regulatory reasons, cost reasons, or otherwise. But we have also an adoption gap. This is not a supply side issue. This is a demand side issue, that people can't afford it, they don't have the device, for example. So there are two different components of that. So when we look at what would this cost, we are actually looking at an investment gap to address 1 million connections. Here we have a range where, for example, in a low-cost area versus a high-cost area. Again, very classic way to understand, and different operators will fall within this range. So to add a new location, a new household, between $1,125 or $2,400. This is US dollars. Now, importantly, Haiti is a part of the Caribbean, a part of the C9 in the operator area. So we didn't have data there, but we estimate 3 million households in Haiti. So when we add Haiti into the picture, we have a low end of 3.3 billion and a high end of 7.2. So altogether, we're looking between 5 to 9.5 billion. So when you think about what are we trying to do in the Caribbean, you can consider the mobile component, which you've just heard about, and now this fixed component. So when we're talking here, why is this not going on today? Why isn't this happening? Of course, the operators want to deploy. Well, first of all, it's high fixed costs. If you think about a fee of $1,000, if you would amortize that over a year, that's between an additional $50 to $200 a month. So if a typical subscription for a fiber to the home network is $50 US, a very basic subscription, imagine doubling that or quadrupling that in order to collect your fixed costs of build out. That is cost prohibitive for the operators, and certainly the consumers can't afford it. So there's not a business case, as you can see, and the consumer doesn't have the ability to pay. Now, I've given you the tough news, but if you'll stay tuned, we're going to transition to the solutions. So with that, I'm going to go to our panel. Zil.
So Priscilla, your boss, Carlos Baigori, recently noted that in the Latin American region, it is estimated that 80% of mobile traffic is generated by applications from three groups: Meta, Google, and TikTok. He said that the problem is that data traffic is growing rapidly while operators' revenues are not. However, to cope with the traffic increase, operators invest heavily in network capacity. Fair share involves making the major traffic generators contribute in some way to the necessary investment. He said Latin America as a whole should formulate a policy for fair share. It is evident that the debate is not only restricted to Brazil, it's a Latin American issue. So in light of those statements by your boss, and I'm sure you will not contradict him, can you share with us what, as the regulator in Brazil, you are seeing in your markets that prompted your national consultation on network users' duties and payment of network usage fees? Or as they call it, the public consultation on fair share in Brazil. And then you can also tell us what's the status of the consultation, and also finally, when can the general public expect to see Anatel present the outcomes of the consultation?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla.
I have a presentation,
Sure.
so let me. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss such a controversial and yet a crucial theme in our telecom industry. Before delving into addressing this topic, I'd like to share some statistics about Brazil's telecom sector to provide a better understanding of why and how we are tackling this issue. Can you pass this slide?
The green button. Green button.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. As you may know, Brazil is a vast country with most of its population concentrated along the coast, leaving large inland areas sparsely populated. Around 80% of our cities have fewer than 30,000 residents, indicating that most Brazilian cities are small, requiring telecom infrastructure, but offering low economic return prospects. Okay. Over the past 15 years, Anatel has implemented several regulatory measures to reduce barriers to entry of service providers, including lowering license costs, regulating wholesale markets, and easing regulatory burdens for small operators. As a result, Brazil boasts a significant number of fixed broadband service providers. This map illustrates the distribution of the number of ISP across municipalities. As you may see, in all of our cities or municipalities, we have, in the majority, at least 6 service providers. In terms of mobile coverage, you may see the same pattern. Oh, can you come back? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Green. And again, please. Can you press again, please? For the next one, please. The next, yes. The next again, please. Okay, thank you. In terms of mobile coverage, you may see the same pattern. This is the scenario nowadays. The great majority of our municipalities already have 4G mobile coverage in urban areas, And by the end of 2030, each of our municipalities will have 5G infrastructure. This is a result of a regulatory measure in which we have decided that 90% of the amount paid by spectrum license should be converted into infrastructure coverage investments on rural and underserved areas. Next slide, please. Okay, coming back, yes. And at the end of 2022, Anatel approved its strategic plan for 2023 and 2027, introducing innovative aspects to the agency's institutional identity, emphasizing connecting Brazil to enhance citizens' lives within the digital ecosystem. Anatel strategy is founded on core values of innovation, regulatory security, social outcomes. If you see this screen, it's pretty much what we have discussed during the first day of this Congress. Yes, can you, another one, please? Another. I believe that they have the wrong version. The wrong version. But that's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
I will try to cover it up. But as part of our strategic plan, we realized that we needed to include a discussion item on potentially regulation regarding network users' duty. And you may be asking yourself, what is this? By the time we were discussing our strategic plan, it has become evident in Brazil that neither the competition regulation nor the consumer regulation adequately addresses the relation among the heavy network traffic users and telecom service providers and its retail consumers. And our Brazilian telecommunications law mandates that Anatel shall regulate the relationship between the value-added services providers and the broadband providers. So we have a specific area in Anatel dedicated to resolving conflicts between telecom operators. And it historically addressed issues such as interconnection fees, network misuse, but recently, these disputes have broadened to include relationship between telcos and fintechs, between telcos and owners of educational platforms, telcos and agriculture supplement industries, and this list gets bigger each day. On the consumer front, Anatel and the telecom operators are receiving consumer complaints against services provided by the big platforms. So to try to address these issues, we launched a public consultation to gather insights from society and the digital stakeholders. And this initial consultation was broad and was looking for inputs on Anatel's role in addressing challenges within this digital ecosystem. It was conducted in the first part of 2023. In the second half of the year, Anatel hosted a workshop on digital ecosystem challenges and a webinar. You may change for the next one, please. And a webinar focused on key themes received from the public consultation. By December 2023, it was proposed a new public consultation with 6 main topics in which we understood was requiring further analysis for potential regulation. And right now, we are reviewing the contributions to prepare a regulatory impact analysis report for submission to the Board of Commissioners by the end of this year. But I would like to focus on one of those 6 main topics that was for public consultation, and the one related to the fair share theme. And it was proposed 7 alternatives: maintaining the status quo, which is doing nothing, and flexibilization of the business models of network operators, aiming to allow greater freedom to offer and consequently greater bargaining power for owners of telecom infrastructure, and 2 options regarding remuneration for the use of network, 2 options regarding the obligation to contribute to a connectivity fund, and another alternative related to improvement of dispute resolution system between agents from different links of the digital value chain. We received a total of 65 contributions. Among these, 77 are related to this fair share issue. And we are right now reading and assessing the contributions, but something that caught our attention is that the small providers, the ones representing the fixed broadband, have advocated for maintaining the status quo, while the 3 major operators, the ones with significant market power according to our competition regulation, have supported the introduction of a regulation on this topic. I must say that at the beginning of this discussion, I was thinking that this would be a textbook example of upstream bargaining power that we see in industrial organization economic fields. But what are we facing right now is quite the opposite. The small providers argued that the fair share would reinforce the market power of the major ones, asserting that the way they deploy its network and structure it is sustainable and mitigate any need for fair share. They also say that they have collaborative partnerships with the big tech companies in which this big tech provides content through content delivery networks, which improves the quality of service for final users and reduce the cost of the services. So, to finish, this is definitely not a textbook case, and we are still in the middle of this analysis, but we expect that by the end of this year, we will have a regulatory proposal to our board. And as my boss usually says, we may not promote a competitor, but we may promote competition. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Priscilla, well, thank you so very much. I think the entire world is looking to see what happens in Brazil on this very important topic. And what is interesting, Rosalind will talk about things happening in South Korea and the USA and Dr. Antoine in the Caribbean. What is amazing to me is the similarities of experience of operators really across the globe on this issue. And we take our hats off to Brazil as a regulator that is obviously very anxious and very committed to look deeply into this issue, because clearly it is seeing significant market failure in the industry in Brazil, hence the need to intervene from a regulatory perspective. So thank you, Priscilla. I think we have our next panelist is Miguel Calderon. Is Miguel on? Miguel. Buenos días.
I'm very interested in the work.
Can you hear us? We can see Miguel. I'm not sure if Miguel can hear us.
I think he's muted.
Hello?
Ah, yes. Now Miguel can hear us.
Yes.
Buenos días. ¿Cómo
Yes.
estás?
Hi, how are you? Sorry not to be there.
We miss you. So Miguel is from Telefónica, And Miguel, in March of this year, I think the CEOs of the major telecommunications companies in Latin America and the Caribbean, including América Móvil, Claro, Telcel, Millicom, Vivo, and your company, Telefonica, those CEOs issued a newsletter entitled A Call to Action to Ensure the Development of the Internet and the Digital Future of Latin America.
Yes.
In the publication, the operators indicated that 230 million Latin American citizens are still not online. 230 million. And that's because of a number of issues related to coverage and usage gaps.
That is correct.
Yeah. And further, they said in that newsletter that due to the growth of data traffic, the cost of network operations are rising year after year, but revenue has been stagnant or falling for several years. In contrast, a small number of large companies generating most of that traffic develop their business models with great success and profitably without being part of the efforts to strengthen the networks on which their services are based. And they called, all of the CEOs called on policymakers in Latin America, and we see what Brazil is doing, to enable flexible schemes in which all participants in the digital ecosystem can contribute equitably to the development of digital infrastructure that is key to the social and economic development of your region. So in light of these, I think, very powerful comments by the CEOs of the major Latin American telecommunications companies, can you share with this audience some of the trends that you are seeing in your markets, the markets in which you operate in Latin America, as it relates to data growth? Who is generating that data? Revenue decline, if any, and what solutions you as an operator would like to see put in place to address the fundamental challenges being faced by the telecommunications industry?
Well, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Telefonica is in 9 countries in Latin America, all the way from Argentina to Mexico. I work for Telefonica Hispam, and we see the entire Latin America that speaks Spanish. So we do not see Vivo in Brazil, but still we have the information. As you said, I think we are crossing a very complex time, and the issue is the sustainability of the industry. And we can see examples. For example, in Chile, WOM just went to Chapter 11. He could not fulfill his investments, the compromises that he had made with the government and with the people. He's also having trouble in Colombia. Digicel in Panama has closed operations. In Mexico, I am from Mexico, and the government has rescued Altan, who was the wholesale carrier. And in the States, Intelsat is receiving some support also in a restructuring plan. So we are seeing different examples in the region of sustainability, that the companies, that the need for the investment, as you have put it, is huge, and the revenues and the return on the investments are not justifying that investment. We have problems, very high spectrum cost. Every time you need to put more infrastructure and you need to support more traffic, you need more spectrum. And the spectrum in the region is twice as high as in other OECD countries. In Mexico, for example, is one of the most expensive places to get a spectrum, and this is not said by us, this is said by the regulator in Mexico, the IFT. In some cases, the government has promoted an artificial competition. This is having too many players without economies of scale, and what happened is that this creates an artificial competition that is also harmful. And obviously, and what we are here for is we have a huge increase of traffic, both in the fixed and the mobile networks, that is not induced by the customer, that is pushed in a way by the big techs. And we can say this because in several times when we have asked, for example, in the COVID, that the big techs manage better their traffic, we have seen huge drops. And even with this discussion of fair share, we can see changes in the traffic pattern that are not linked with the user. The user is asking for a service, but he's receiving maybe high quality video, he's receiving a lot of advertising, he's receiving a lot of information that he is not even aware that he has asked for it. In these last 10 years, we have seen a drop in our revenues in real terms of 38%. And at the same time, and you can check different sources, but we have seen an increase in traffic, in fixed traffic, more than 10% every year. And in mobile, between 22 and 26% of increase of traffic every year. And obviously, we have to support this traffic. So what we're doing as an industry, first, we're trying to convince that we need several regulatory changes. We need to reduce the tax imposition. We are, in some countries, the only ones that are paying taxes. We are also doing different efforts in network sharing, especially for 5G. 5G requires to build much more antennas because of the capacity and because of the propagation characteristics of the frequencies that we're using, 3.5 gigahertz. And we need to link all of those base stations or e-nodes with fiber. So also we need a massive deployment of fiber. And obviously all of this investment, what we're saying is that all the agents, all the people, all the companies that are benefiting from a digital ecosystem, from a bigger and better digital ecosystem, should contribute with infrastructure and should contribute with access infrastructure, because the backbone and the data centers, and it's needed, we are not saying, but it's a small fraction of the investment that is needed. According to a study that we did with NERA, just for the traffic increase that we're foreseeing in the 5-6 years ahead, we're going to need $30 billion of investment. And of those, around 8 billion are just related to spectrum costs. GSMA did a study recently, and I don't know if they presented to you in the meeting, and they say that in our region, 85% of the traffic is generated only by 3 big techs, and 58% of it is only generated by one. And as I said, if any of these players do any changes in the way, in the encoding that they do, in the algorithms that they do, in the publicity that they send, you can see dramatic changes in the traffic. So this is not a traffic generated only by the user. So where we are, that's basically why we send that command. Still, we're working in the network sharing. As I explained, we have different examples that we can talk to you about. What are we doing to deal with this traffic growth and to these investment requirements? In Chile and Colombia, we have made a wholesale company for fiber with a fund with KKR. In Mexico, we are doing a network sharing agreement with AT&T. In Colombia, we're doing a sharing agreement, a network sharing agreement with AT&T. And all this is very good, but will not be sufficient to cover that gap that we have. And just some of the things that have been said in different forums. well, really traffic is not getting out of control. Mobile traffic growth rates are slowing down. If it's true that maybe a year ago, the expectation was that the traffic increase in Latin America was going to be 28%. According to the last Ericsson Mobility report, is going to be 22% in the following years. 22% is still a huge traffic increase. That means that in a 4-year period, we're going to double the traffic that is already in exabytes. So it's a huge amount of traffic. Another thing that it says is that the end customer is paying for the traffic. And so the telco should not be allowed to charge twice. Well, the end customer is paying for access to a number of services, and that is required to be, and that is okay. But in Latin America, customers are very sensible to prices. And if we increase prices, so all the cost is paid by the customers, we're going to have a bigger usage gap. Because in that amount that you say, the 230 million, I will say that the most of it is usage gap. And the usage gap is related to 3 things. They do not know how to use the service, so we need education, but that is a small percentage. That they don't have the handset, that they don't have the device to enter the internet, and this is something that is related also to the price. And the third is that the service for them seems very high, and the services and the cost of the services, as I have said, have been reducing 38% in the last 10 years. So any increase in the prices will have a huge impact in the region. And as I said, the traffic is not always asked by the customer. In many instances, the traffic that the customer is seeing some traffic that they did not ask, advertising, videos, things like that they did not ask. The big techs are saying that they are making a contribution. Yes, they are. They're contributing to content delivery infrastructure and to backbone infrastructure. But that is part of their business plan. And they are not really going into the issue of the coverage obligations and the coverage investments that are needed to fulfill those gaps. And basically, those are the access networks.
Yeah.
And that is the most expensive part of the network. And at last, we have to recognize that this is a two-sided market. And in a two-sided market, you are able to collect revenues from the customer, but also collect revenues from the one that is originating the traffic and is getting benefit from those services. And maybe I leave it there and open to questions.
So Miguel, thank you so much for that contribution and sharing with us what operators are experiencing in Latin America. It is entirely consistent with what we're seeing in the Caribbean. And unfortunately, my colleague from the Pacific Islands didn't make it to the conference, but he would share similar experience of what they're going through in the Pacific Islands. A couple of things that you said really stand out. You have an investment gap of $30 billion US, that your revenue has declined by, is it 38%?
38%.
Yeah. Those are extraordinary numbers. And I think then you would obviously agree with Priscilla's boss at Anatel, who says that this issue of fair share and who ought to contribute on an equitable basis to the development of networks is not just a Brazilian issue, it's a Latin American issue which has to be addressed.
No, totally agree. And that's why all the CEOs issued that letter, issued that statement.
Yes, good. Roslyn, can I turn over to you? And if you can share with us what's happening specifically in South Korea and in the United States on this issue, because clearly this is a global telecoms issue.
Absolutely. So I would love to get a presentation. Strand Consult has been pleased to be following the global broadband cost recovery movement for 4 or 5 years now. And it's very exciting $10. So you have a situation here where you have platforms which don't pay any taxes in the Caribbean, no regulatory fees, no registration, no local employees, no local investment, but yet can enjoy $9 or $10 trillion global market cap, compared to operators which have to maintain all of the local requirements and the obligation to build and realize the gigabit society. So I think in any, something on the order of 18% of their revenue would be going to infrastructure. The numbers put forth by the tech companies on their own plant are less than 1% of their revenues. So this concept here of cost recovery, I would suggest originated at the United Nations Broadband Commission. There is an excellent report to which many in this region have contributed, the 21st Century Broadband Financing Models report, and there they have an important concept called broadening the base of contributions. And that is essentially to say that the obligations to realize connecting the world, we have still 1/3 left offline, is to extend this to the larger ICT ecosystem, whether it's hardware, software, banks, digital advertising companies, cloud computing, you name it, everybody in the ICT ecosystem who benefits. It could be philanthropies, it could be financial institutions, international development banks, but we need to broaden the base. And that's extremely important. So now, globally, I'm so sorry, I'm missing, my map didn't get in this version. So, but let me say, we have had consultations in Europe. There's been consultations in the United States, in Brazil, in South Korea. In India, they have updated their Telecommunications Act to reflect that OTTs are telecommunication services. Now, they haven't conducted a fair share proceeding, but they have groundwork that should they want to explore that in the future, it's there. So I'm going to describe South Korea for you because this is I would say, at the forefront of this movement in the sense that this is a country predicated on technology leadership. They are first to 5G, first to 6G, and they must maintain high investment, high technology development. And bear in mind, they're the world's 7th largest content exporter. So they see their networks as facilitating their ability to create and export their K-pop and other films and music and cultural products to the world. So they cannot afford to have any day with a slowdown. So interestingly, if you look at the case of South Korea, you have a highly consolidated market, which has been there for 20 years, still scoring at the top of the ITU and OECD in terms of broadband competition, pricing, access, use, and skills, and so forth. Now, their network usage fee regime, which is nascent, about 3 or 4 years in, the usage fees amount to less than 1% of the revenue in the economy. Now, in addition to that, every participant in Korea, whether you're foreign or domestic, participates. Whether it's public sector, small content provider, large content provider. If you're not an ISP in Korea, you're a user. That is the basic setup in the Korean model. So there's an expectation that everybody must contribute. Now, importantly, they did adapt a Service Stabilization Act a few years ago called the Netflix Law, and this is requiring that if you are a content provider accounting for more than 1% of total traffic and having 1 million users, you must have a bilateral negotiation to cover your requirements to deliver the content in high quality. And that is up to the two parties themselves. There is no imposition of fees, but there is an expectation that some kind of good faith negotiation will go on. These are confidential, they're negotiated. The government doesn't get involved. Now, there have been some litigation associated with these things. There was a long-running series of lawsuits between Facebook and Netflix. They have been settled in the favor of fees. So Netflix concluded a $30 million payment, if you will, But interestingly, when they settled that, they lost the first round and then settled. But when they announced the settlement, they considered it groundbreaking. They offer higher advanced AI-enabled Netflix. They've improved their distribution because they bundle their service with broadband. So Netflix has enjoyed record profits in South Korea for the past 3 years. It's a great market for them, even with the fees that they pay. Now, granted, every deal with every operator is different, but that's the way that the South Koreans have decided to do it. There have been some issues with Meta. You may know, I think it was referenced, Mr. Antonius described the lawsuit with Meta. Deutsche Telekom sued Meta for breach of contract. They stopped paying after 10 years, but insisted on their traffic continuing to be delivered. That was settled for, it's 20 million, not 15 million. But in any event, these things happen. To be honest, it hasn't really changed the market because it's been ongoing and the investments take place. The remaining issue, however, is that Google has refused to pay. And for that reason, 7 bills in the last Korean Assembly have been put forth under the name Free Ride Prevention Act. They didn't get through in time for the election, but now that effort is beginning again. So there remains a challenge in Korea to get the largest player, which is 27% of the total traffic, to participate in their system. And so this is a remaining issue. The important thing with Korea is that there is a source of accountability provided by the government in that they make a public statement every quarter of the traffic in the country, of the largest platforms, and which are also Korean, and that's made public to facilitate a transparent and accountable process for negotiation. Now, let's turn to the United States, and I think we have many U.S. representatives here, which is excellent, particularly FCC, which has been a tremendous leader in broadband deployment in the United States. Chairman Rosenworcel with the Affordable Connectivity Program, probably the most successful connectivity program in the U.S., has brought 22 million people, kept them connected, and brought at least 10 or 12 million new people online for the first time. There's a desire to preserve that program going forward, but the FCC conducted a Future of Universal Service proceeding, which many participated. And in the United States, you have about 3,000 broadband providers, 1,000 of which are USF recipients. So they are serving rural areas, they're small, but every Caribbean operator would fit into that category given their challenges. So let's say a small operator in Kansas, you can put the state of Maryland inside of Kansas, and one operator is serving an area that size with only a few 10,000 customers. So what I'm going to share with you is certainly relevant from the perspective of the Caribbean. I find it interesting in Brazil that the small providers were less enthused because in the United States, this whole movement for cost recovery has been driven by the small providers because in their case, if they're USF recipients, they only can cover their fixed costs, not the operating costs. And the operating costs are now exceeding the fixed costs because the traffic growth is so high. So that has been recognized in the FCC report, and the United States Senate has taken up a process through its bipartisan Universal Service Fund working group. And there's been a series of bills that have been contemplated. One became public here, which is the Kelly-Mullen bill, a bipartisan bill called Lowering Broadband Costs for Consumers Act of 2023. And one or two other ideas are in play. But in this case, there is envisioned a Universal Service Fund reform on the order of extending the fund to $15 to $20 billion a year to cover affordable connectivity for end users, to cover operating costs, fixed costs. But the key change in this is to broaden the base, getting the larger ICT sector to participate. So that means digital advertising, cloud computing, different software services that line up to particular definitions in the Communications Act or different codes from the industry codes which are relevant for telecommunications. So importantly there, if the U.S. digital economy is something at a minimum $5 trillion, but if you can assess a large revenue pool at less than 1%, and you can get more than enough revenue when you look at it from that picture, the money is collected by the FCC and then distributed to the provider, to the operators, to the schools and libraries, to the end users, and so forth. So that is quite a workable model in that respect. But I would say only the U.S. could pull that off. It could not work in Europe because there's no pan-USF. Can't work in the Caribbean, no pan-USF. And of course, that's a established model with an administrative corporation associated with it, with legislation, with a regulatory agency. So it's a rich country model. When I talk to parties in Africa, sounds great, but that's never going to fly. They have to have the market work. And that is why I think the illustration of South Korea is so important. They don't want to stand up the regulatory resources to do this because it is time-consuming. The FCC, however, has capability to do it. So, but what are we?
So Rosalind, yeah, that is, I'm just mindful of time.
Very good. Thank you. So I will be here later if you have more to discuss.
And I think, Rosalind, great, because you presented two very distinct approaches to dealing with what is now a well-established issue. So South Korea has taken, that's one model and one approach to dealing with broadband cost recovery generally, and the United States has taken a different approach. I want to turn quickly to Dr. Antoine, who is the chairman of the Caribbean Private Sector, CARICOM Private Sector Organization. And Dr. Antoine, the Caribbean has been actively involved in frontally dealing with the challenges that will need to be addressed for the Caribbean to develop into a gigabit society by 2030. In fact, CARICOM has set up a working group, which you chair, to review models to achieve a CARICOM gigabit society by 2030. That group is required to prepare a report for CARICOM heads of government. Can you share with us an overview of the landscape in the Caribbean as it relates to the establishment of a gigabit society, and in particular, the issue of infrastructure, investment, sustainability? And as you know, that issue is extremely topical in light of the passage of Hurricane Beryl. And you know, the NOAA is projecting that we may have 3 or 4 more hurricanes this season alone that are category 3 or 5. So it is not over.
Good. Thank you. So colleagues, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me as the CEO and Technical Director of the CARICOM Private Sector Organization, and I speak on behalf of my executive. We're really delighted to be working with you on this extremely important topic, and for us in the Caribbean, this topic is a topic whose time has come, and the whole issue of connectivity and certainly the gigabit society for the Caribbean is one that cuts across all of the various dimensions of our development. And so I want to get to the presentation that we have, and having regard to the time, I want to, I'm not going to speak in 4 minutes, am I? So colleagues, look, this is my second rodeo on these topics. I led the CARICOM working group on ICT for about 7 years, up to 2018, in a different capacity as the senior advisor to Prime Minister Mitchell, who was the Prime Minister with lead responsibility for ICT at the time. The capacity that I'm in now as a private sector allows me to see this, both from the lens of the member states and certainly from the lens of those who are concerned about cost increases, but also from the lens of the tremendous number of sectors and people in the Caribbean that clamor for, and I see my colleague David here from Cable and Wireless Barbados. I hope you have moved. Sorry, David, I called some time ago because our youth in the Caribbean invited me to a forum. They said, look, we want 5G. We're having a number of problems. We're not able to compete with others, bandwidth, speed. And we then had an engagement, and I reached out to David at the time and said, look, what's happening? And this is in 2018-19. The answer is, look, the business case, Patrick, is just not there. And I reached out to the colleagues in Grenada and in other countries, and it was the same response. So the question for us, as I approach this in the new capacity, is how do we make the business case for this? We've spoken a lot, and I think everything that's been said, Priscilla, thank you. Thank you so much for the excellent presentation, brings this single issue to the fore on how do we make this business case and what do we need to do in order to get the movement that we all recognize will challenge our development in the Caribbean if we don't. And so very quickly, the issue of the population size, which we've been talking about in terms of shaping this, is substantial. We are talking about 43 million people, and in a previous life, I actually had responsibilities for investment and trade. When we were talking about all of this market integration, I led that for the OAS and for a number of other institutions across Latin America and the Caribbean. And in all of those discussions, the issue of ICT and connectivity was central. And indeed, we come to the second issue of the gap in terms of persons who can't afford the service and what we need to do to bring them into the net where essentially they too can participate, and that remains an issue. I think the 13 million figure that we have here in terms of the 4G internet access, right, helps to tell this story. So that we're talking about 43, we're talking about 13, but I already told you that in so many countries there is this gap of persons who are essentially not connected or not connected at the level where it can contribute to their own economic development, their welfare, and the achievements and aspirations they have for their life. At the end of the day, we are talking about people and development. We're not just talking about a technology. And so for the 35% or so remaining offline, as we have this discussion today, I'm so drawn to the model that you've presented because I think the elements of those models that are going to be important for the Caribbean. The, of course, 1% of the mobile connections at 5G is a matter I just told you. The artists who are calling us from the Caribbean and other places who want to connect, who are not able to achieve their own aspirations for a better life, to unleash their potential, people, they are asking us for some solutions to this problem. And so the investment gap, as I said at the beginning of the discussion, that this time has come. This investment gap of 3.45 billion really is what we're talking about in terms of connecting with 4G coverage, adoption, and 5G. For us, Haiti is an indispensable part of this discussion. For us, if we are talking about how we bring this community together, this community of CARICOM, this community of this hemisphere, we have to be including in this discussion the tremendous potential of the people in all our countries, and for us in CARICOM, Haiti as an integral part of the CARICOM model is important. And it's important now because as we all strive towards normalization of economic development in Haiti, then I think this discussion in bringing to the solution set in Haiti what can be one of the largest contributors to the development is going to be particularly important today. So the fixed investment of the $5 to $9 million includes Haiti, and it's the reason I've made such heavy weather of this. The 4 OTTs generating the 70% of the traffic therefore fits within the approach that we've taken in CARICOM, that if you benefit, then you have to contribute. And it's interesting because this discussion is a discussion in all the countries. Certainly, it's a discussion that we approach the people of Grenada with. in the wake of Hurricane Ivan, and I had the opportunity of leading the discussion then and building the model with the IMF that made ordinary persons who are benefiting from services, who are not paying into the pool. Our model was to bring everyone into the pool on the basis that if you benefit, you pay. And when we are able to get our services and the value chain to a level where we can lower rates, then we do that. And of course, to me, this discussion is one that I think we have to start messaging appropriately, because in all other spheres, we've said to our people that if you benefit, you must contribute. The contribution may be different because of your different levels, but if you benefit, you contribute. We're doing it now in maritime services, where we're building out ports. If you benefit, you must contribute. And so this fits within that context, and I want to ask you to move to the second slide very quickly. So for us, what we're doing in CARICOM is this. We've said, look, let's step away from this discussion that this is really about the ISPs and the operators and the OTTs. Let's step away from that and recognize that in all the models that we have, in the CARICOM development model, connectivity, ICT, digitalization, the digital, what we call the gigabit society, is mainstreamed in every single pillar. And I want to leave you with that, because you need to ground your engagements in the fact that in our community, in every single development plan, there is this recognition of the centrality of what we're talking about today in bringing people who are offline online, in bringing better services, so that I'm so happy in the discussion this morning, we started by talking about jobs and people and economic development, because that is what this is about. We're talking today in CARICOM. Last week, we had Trinidad and Tobago talk about and approve in their own parliament this bill on the special economic zones. In Jamaica, they led the discussion on special economic zones. In Barbados, they're talking about special economic zones. And in all of these discussions, there's this presumption that this backbone that we're talking about is going to be there to enable that. And so when we talk about what we're doing in CARICOM, is that we've changed the discussion. I think one thing Lisa has done well with the C9 group as part of CANTO is that they've said, look, let us now approach this differently. So we first begun by building consensus with the private sector, all of the private sector. CARICOM has a 25 by 25 strategy to reduce food imports by 25% by 2025. We've linked all of this together and said, look, all of this is threatened. And so we found in the private sector this consensus, which we then took to CARICOM. And previously, those pillars that we operated in, those silos, we now have the CTU at the table, we have CANTO at the table, we have the CARICOM community at the table, we have ORCOR at the table. So we've now for the first time built a coalition which recognizes that all of this is grounded in this concept of this gigabit Caribbean society. And we've gone back and we've said this Caribbean gigabit society, not trivial, takes on board all the aspirations and the things we could not achieve when we talked about a single ICT space for CARICOM. Because we've recognized that that discussion required us to go further and to build consensus first. So there's a working group. I lead the working group. The working group now has the energy and the dynamism and the joined up empirical evidence that we now have emerging. And I'm so happy we had the report from GMSA, because I think that's the kind of evidence that we now need to make the shift. And you have the energy, and I'm going to just make one plug and say to you, don't lose it. If there is one criticism I would bring to the process, is that I'm not hearing enough engagement from you. I'm hearing it from us when we engage, but I'm not hearing enough engagement from you. When you meet with governments, when you meet with regulators, when you meet with others in the private sector. And I want to urge you to do that. So what we've done is that we've now developed terms of reference. And the terms of reference that we've developed are consensus terms of reference, which includes the Caribbean Secretariat or the Caribbean Community. And on top of that, we've then developed very quickly an operationalization plan. Who will do what? What are we intending to do? We're intending to bring to the heads of government in CARICOM, by its next meeting early next year, a very clear set of proposals which sets out what we would like to see emerge from them in helping us to find a lasting, sustainable solution to this issue. Now, this will take a lot from you, because one of the things we have to demonstrate to heads is that there's a sufficient level of engagement. Article 26 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas now implores all of us to demonstrate, not just to have it and to speak about it in the press, but to demonstrate that we've had engagements at all the levels. And those engagements are necessary, those engagements are possible, and those engagements will help us with the groundswell that's required to have this settled even before we get to the heads of government in early 2025. And so in all of this, with the operationalization plan, and with the right players at the table, and with the private sector recognizing that they too today are impacted by this, all of this, if we work together, will help us to achieve this single ICT space, which is one key step to this Caribbean Gigabit Society by 2030. So what did we do in the last quarter with the leadership from Lisa and the drive and the weekly calls and with the colleagues from C9? What we've done is that we have now settled in CARICOM a new definition. We've started a new discussion. We've had to redefine what this Caribbean Gigabit Society means. We did that deliberately. We're using that essentially as the new construct that we work to. And we've said that this is important for the Caribbean by 2030. And so, colleagues, as I wrap up, the issue then becomes how we deal with the things such as speed and capacities and standards. And for us, the legal framework is going to be important, and the terms of reference deals with all of this. And I want to just say two things. I really like what I've seen with the GMSA study. But having myself led on the macroeconomic models for many of the countries, there is no one size fits all. And so the fiscal framework that's pointed to in the recommendations from the studies, we're going to have to look at how we cut and contrive that. For instance, there's some countries where there's no more to give. We've already reduced fiscal charges and taxes. There are others where governments have gone up. But where they're so wedded, their macroeconomic plans, to these fees, if we were to go and ask for reductions, right, we're closing the door on what we really want. Because they themselves challenged by hurricanes, and I'm Grenadian by birth, though I grew up in Jamaica, challenged by hurricanes where they have to rebuild and being concerned about building back, right, their reserves. We're not going to get them to move. So in a lot of instances, we need to look at the studies, which are really important. That's the basis. But we now need to contextualize that so that the results we want by governments who are concerned about the fiscal, yes, we can really get those results. And I think I wanted to leave that with you, because that means that every single one of you in this room, in your countries, you have to help us contextualize that and help us frame the conversation so that it's going to receive the reception that we want with your governments. And so I wanted to bring this to you from a policy perspective, but also to say to you that the Caribbean can't wait and we're losing ground. And for us, even as we leave today, always think about how can we use the sector and what we want to help to build the resilient Caribbean societies and the resilient Caribbean countries that we want. I want to thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Antoine, thank you so much for that overview. And if it's one figure I want everybody to take away with the combination of the GSMA mobile investment gap and Rosalind's analysis of the fixed investment gap, we're talking about a range of between 5 billion a total of 8.45 billion US dollars and 12.45 billion dollars as the investment gap in CARICOM. That's a serious issue. Priscilla, thank you so much for coming from Brazil and sharing with us what's happening there. Dr. Antoine, Rosalind, and I don't know if Miguel is still on, but thank you so much, Miguel.
And thank you, Lisa Agard, for moderating this session, Achieving Gigabit Society's Infrastructure Investments and Sustainability. To our panelists, Rosalind Layton, Dr. Patricia, Dr. Patrick Antoine, Miguel Calderon, and Priscilla Honorario Evangelista.
Thank you.
As Dr. Antoine says, for fair share, if you participate, you need to contribute. We're looking at between 5 billion and 12 billion investment gap for us to get to our gigabyte society by 2030. And at this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage for our fireside chat, Vice Chairman of CANTO, our moderator, Dr. Del Rio Newman. And he will be joined by Steve Lang, Ambassador International Information and Communications Policy, the U.S. government. And this fireside chat will be looking at U.S. telecom and cyber assistance priorities for the region. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Yeah, I guess right here.
Okay, great.
Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I have the distinct privilege of speaking with His Excellency, Ambassador Lang. He is the U.S. Coordinator for International Communications and Information Policy, the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. I'm not going to read his bio because first it's too long. Just know that he is well qualified and this is not his first rodeo. But for those of you who may be interested, his bio is on the State Department's website. Secondly, why I'm not going into any additional bio reading is because you, my colleagues, gave me too many questions to ask the ambassador. So just let's hope he can speak real quickly. Ambassador, first of all, on behalf of CANTO, thank you for coming here and giving us some of your time. First, would you like to tell us the main goals of your office and how in your work as ambassador you collaborate with Caribbean nations in developing policy that impacts the telecommunications sector?
Yes, and thank you, Del Rio, and thank you to CANTO for the opportunity to join you all here today. This is not my first rodeo, I guess, but it is my first CANTO, so I'm excited to be here. It's a great opportunity for me and my colleagues to come and hear a lot of different perspectives about the challenges that our government counterparts and that industry is facing in the region. And really, we did come here to listen and to hear those perspectives. So it's been fantastic so far, and I'm sorry that I have to leave this afternoon. And I also, before saying a few words about the work of our office and our bureau, I did want to just reiterate my colleague Narda Jones' message of condolences from the United States government for the damage and devastation caused by Hurricane Beryl. And to note that we are our colleagues are ready to work with our counterparts around the region to try to provide humanitarian assistance to those working on that effort. But on the work that we do, I'm with our Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy at the State Department. And it's actually a new bureau. It's about 2 years old. And it was created by Secretary Blinken, our Secretary of State, as part of his modernization agenda for the Department of State, bringing together different parts of the State Department that were working on cyberspace and digital issues. I lead the team that was in our Economic and Business Affairs Bureau previously that works on digital economy issues. But we have another team that was working on cybersecurity, and we have a new team that's working on digital freedom. And the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy brings them all together to elevate that work and to prioritize it within our State Department priorities, but also to make sure that we're dealing with these issues holistically, because they are so interconnected, because our success in building a prosperous digital economy depends on having strong cybersecurity. And part of our objective here is to make sure that people can use technology to express themselves and to assemble freely, and that technology is not used as a tool to censor speech or to suppress other opinions. And we are working with colleagues around the world. We recently Secretary Blinken announced our international cyberspace and digital policy strategy in May. And one of the underlying themes, guiding principle for that strategy is digital solidarity. And through digital solidarity, we want to work with our colleagues, friends, and partners around the world to achieve mutual goals, to provide mutual support, to provide capacity building, to make sure that we are working together to shape an international ecosystem that encourages innovation, but also provides an open, interoperable, secure, and resilient ICT ecosystem. And with the Caribbean, we're working both multilaterally and bilaterally. My team works a lot in organizations like the International Telecommunications Union on development efforts and standardization. We work a lot in the OAS, including on some capacity building efforts. We're working together in the UN. We were very happy that that in February we were able to pass the UN General Assembly resolution on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI for sustainable development, with support from all members of the United Nations and I think more than 120 co-sponsors. And we're working bilaterally. I've been fortunate enough to have over the last year or so chances to engage with delegations visiting Washington from Trinidad and Tobago and Bahamas to talk about some of our shared objectives and how we can work together. So we have a number of different priorities that we want to work together with our counterparts and friends from the region, and a busy agenda.
Great, thanks. Would you elaborate on any efforts by the U.S. to improve digital infrastructure and address the digital divide in the Caribbean, specifically in remote areas where the gap is large?
Yes. Expanding connectivity and bridging digital divides is a high priority for the US government and the State Department around the world. And we have a number of different programs that we're trying to do that through. My bureau has especially a variety of training programs and capacity building programs that address issues like regulatory environments that encourage innovation and investment, capacity building in cybersecurity. We're working together with our partners in USAID that have programs throughout Latin America and the Caribbean that are focused on promoting digital skilling and entrepreneurship. I know that our colleagues in the U.S. Trade Development Agency, USTDA, are working with Jamaica on a smart city program. We're working on building an Open RAN test lab in the region that would allow regional stakeholders from a variety of countries to come and test equipment. So there are a number of different programs, and we are working at it from a whole of government approach. I have my colleague Elizabeth Waworka here from our embassy in Barbados, who is a point of contact for a number of our training programs. And of course, we have good presence from my colleagues at the FCC that are working on exchange programs and technical assistance for regulator counterparts around the region as well.
All right, great, thank you. Considering the recent devastation caused by Hurricane Beryl and the expectation that this will be one of the worst hurricane seasons, what specific steps can telecommunication companies in the Caribbean take to enhance their cooperation with the U.S. in efforts to improve telecommunications infrastructure in the region and make it more resilient to climate change?
Yes, I think there are a number of things that we need to do. First of all, the United States, my team at the State Department works closely with counterparts around the world, including through the ITU, to work on disaster communications resiliency to make sure that we have communications operational during disasters and to connect the private sector with disaster responders. I think that we need to use our technical assistance programs to make sure that we are building regulatory frameworks that ensure that we have resiliency. And I think we need to, in addition, build out some of our assistance programs to make sure that that's a priority as well. And I know that my colleagues are working on developing a humanitarian assistance program to work with the region in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl as well.
Okay. Well, of course, you know about the OTTs, and that has been one of the big conversations here today.
Yeah, I have heard something about that here.
Right, as you may know, in our region, there's an ongoing discussion about the OTT service providers and their responsibility to contribute to the development of local telecommunications network infrastructure. Is the U.S. engaged in the Caribbean or in any other small countries? And if so, how does the U.S. view this situation?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that we recognize this is a complex problem and that different countries around the world are trying to deal with different conditions, different market conditions. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the problems of the high cost of investment and the rapidly developing technology that is increasing the amount of data that our networks need to carry. I will say that the United States is engaged with partners around the world on this issue. We've talked a lot with our partners in the EU as they've looked at it. We've talked with partners in Korea and Brazil. The U.S. perspective in general has been, first of all, that we do not support government-mandated direct payments from online platforms to telecom operators. We see that it's important to make sure that there's public accountability built into any kind of system. And that's why in the United States, we have relied primarily on programs like the Universal Service Fund, which is operated by our FCC and which makes sure that there is accountability to ensure that the policy objectives for these funds are used in a manner that achieves those objectives. We also have our BEAD or BEAD Act program that is providing public funds towards expanding connectivity in the United States. And I guess I would just emphasize that we agree that connectivity is a high priority, that we need to make sure that we have safe, secure, trustworthy connectivity, meaningful connectivity that allows people to access online content that is useful for them in a safe and secure manner. And the objectives that we've heard discussed here today and this week are important objectives. I think that we have some different views on the best way to achieve those objectives and ensure that the money that is being identified for those objectives is being used towards those ends of expanding connectivity. But I've heard a lot and learned a lot during the conversations here, and we'll take those messages back to Washington.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that you say it's complex, but in the absence of those countries that do not have a USF fund, how would you propose us getting any contributions at all?
Well, I think that I don't have a a silver bullet solution for this challenge. And I think we have to look at a broad toolkit of different options to increase funding. And I can just emphasize that the U.S. position is that for this specific type of payment, a government-mandated payment from platforms to operators is something that we don't support. But we do recognize the problem and support the goal of trying to expand connectivity in the region.
Okay. Are there any countries that the U.S. would highlight that have done an excellent job in balancing the interests of OTT service providers, local network providers, governments, and customers?
Well, I don't think that there's an example that we think has worked flawlessly. I think throughout countries around the world, there are different market conditions, different challenges, different circumstances, and they've employed different approaches and techniques. None of those have been perfect. None of those have achieved all the objectives without running into challenges or obstacles. So I don't have one that I think is a perfect model for any country, for other countries. I think we have to look at these on a case-by-case basis and try to identify what makes the most sense based on existing conditions.
Okay. Just changing gears here, let's move on to cybersecurity. Considering the increasing cyber threats, how is the U.S. working to combat cyber crime and protect critical infrastructure? And if you could highlight where those efforts are in collaboration with Caribbean countries.
Yeah. Well, first of all, cybersecurity is one of the key components of the work that we're doing, and we see it as critical to be able to make sure that we are able to take advantage of the benefits of these technologies and the connectivity that we're trying to bring. And our Bureau works closely with partners throughout the U.S. government to try to do that. And I mentioned some of our capacity building programs, which has been a key component of our work. Another effort is to provide support to our partners when they are victims of cyber incidents. And we have worked closely with other partners in the U.S. government as part of that effort as well. We work with our DoD colleagues, and Southcom has been an important partner in the region in those efforts, as well as some state National Guard units. I know that the Delaware National Guard has had a productive relationship with Trinidad and Tobago in addressing cybersecurity concerns. We work as well with USAID that is conducting an assessment, a cybersecurity assessment for countries in the East Caribbean region. So we have to, I think, take a number of different approaches to the problem and work with a variety of different partners.
Looking to the future, what do you see as the most effective long-term telecommunication policies that would further the Caribbean region's goals regarding education, the digital divide, and capacity building?
Yep, I think, again, I don't think I have a silver bullet recommendation that is going to address all of those challenges. I think that really we need to work together to make sure that consistent with our approach of digital solidarity with our close partners who share democratic values and our rights-respecting approach to technology, that we are sharing information about best practices. We want to be able to provide technical assistance and exchanges that can help create an environment, a regulatory environment that fosters innovation, that encourages investment and creates opportunities, provides the skills that people need to make sure that they are able to safely and securely access these technologies.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. And then finally, is there anything else you would like to share with our audience today, especially focusing on the future of digital communications between the U.S. and the Caribbean?
Well, I guess I would just like to reiterate my appreciation and my thanks for the opportunity to come and hear from the many different governments that are represented here, from our industry friends who are also participating, about the challenges that you're facing. And it has given us a lot of information that we can take back and look and assess with our colleagues in Washington on how we might best be able to work together. And again, to underscore that our objective here is to, under a framework of digital solidarity, try to achieve our shared goals, work together to achieve these objectives of expanding connectivity, making sure that we can use these technologies in a safe, secure, and trustworthy way that creates an open, interoperable, secure, and resilient ecosystem that brings benefits to our economies and our societies.
Great. Well, audience, I think that's all we have time for today. And I would like to thank you, Ambassador, for coming again. And with that, could you give our ambassador the round of applause?
Thank you, Ambassador Steve Lang, International and Information Communications Policy from the U.S. government, and Dr. Delria Newman, our CANTO Vice Chairman. Another round of applause. So we have one more exciting presentation just before our coffee break. It will be delivered by Sergio Cano, Chief Executive Officer, JSC Ingenium, and he'll be talking to us about navigating the future, integrating legacy networks with 5G, and embracing cloud-native solutions. Please give him a CANTO welcome. They'll put up the presentation, and then you can click. I think it's up.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Dear CANTO members, this is my first time, and of course, it will not be the last time in CANTO. And before going into the presentation, I would like to say a couple of very important things. First of all, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to talk to you today. And second, congratulations, because in the 27 years in the telco industry, I have never seen such a spirit of collaboration, and I have never seen such a feeling of belonging to a greater community, transcending your local markets, sharing the challenges, and working hand in hand to find solutions for the benefit of the people in your community. So let me say again, congratulations, and please never lose this spirit. So let's go into the presentation, 5G. What is 5G? We all know this. We have heard this hundreds of times or even more. And we are all a little bit tired of listening to the promise of 5G technology. But as we have seen in previous presentations, 5G is reaching only 1% of the population in the Caribbean area, which is a real problem. So what's happening? What is real? What is the reality of 5G? Not only the promises. Let's try to dig a little bit into that. Before going to the details, I would like to share with you this graph, which comes from the GSMA, which shows the different applications, depending on the bandwidth they require and depending on the delay that they may require to be effective. As you can see, there are two boxes. There is a light box and a gray box. In the white box, what you can see is that most of the applications are located inside this box. This is what we can do currently with 4G. So there are only a few applications that really need 5G to execute properly and to deliver the service to the users. So everybody's talking about 5G, but the reality is that on one side, there is a huge promise. On the other side, there is not too much clarity on which ones will be the drivers that will bring this promise and which applications will be the leaders for the new 5G networks. On top of that, we have to be very careful because between the white box and the gray box, there is a clash, there is a big clash in the network. The difference between the existing networks and the new networks is very significant. And this is really a challenge for us. Now we have a headache, let's call it a headache, the current network, the infrastructure and the applications. Now with 5G, what are we going to have? 2 headaches instead of one? Well, clearly, this is a no-go. If we also take into consideration what my colleague from the GSMA said and what the Strand Consult said a few minutes before, it looks like 5G is a promise which is not clear if it will be fulfilled or not, and also very difficult to afford. But also adding some technical challenges, such as multiplicity of networks, higher complexity. A 5G network is not easier than a 4G network. And the lack of collaboration from some vendors, it was mentioned in the opening session. The difficulties to monetize it. And depending on certain local situations, some of the operators are not even ready for VoLTE today. And VoLTE is something necessary to embrace 5G standalone. So then what shall we do? We usually turn to see these challenges as opportunities. We usually like to turn threats into opportunities for new business. So let me show you what, in my opinion, is a very beautiful video that shows what 5G is. A friend of mine told me that if I put a few ones and zeros pouring down, together with Keanu Reeves shooting the enemies down, it could be called the Matrix. But isn't it amazing? Isn't it beautiful? I think it's really beautiful. Well, what are we seeing here? It's not a joke, it's not a demo. We are setting up completely a 4G, 5G, and VoLTE network. It's not real time, it's 5 times faster than reality. It lasts 1 minute and 5 seconds. Now, in reality, it's close to 6 minutes. So it takes 6 minutes to bring up a network, bring up a real network that can handle traffic, okay? So what is this? This is the real promise for the operators of 5G. I'm not talking about the users. I'm not talking about the applications. I'm not talking about the OTTs. We have talked a lot today about the OTTs. I'm talking about the opportunities that 5G brings along with a new way of working. And there you are. The network is finished. Well, this is a real customer currently in the Netherlands. And this is the way we build the network. He couldn't really believe it. He said, "You're joking." I said, "Okay, here's your phone. Please make a call and test it. It's your network, okay?" So this new way of working should be applied, in our opinion, not only to 5G, but also to 4G. A significant part of the answer to all the investment problems is here, is in the technology, is in the efficiency of the vendors. If you benefit from that, then the investment problem will look totally different. What is our vision? Our vision for 5G network is, first of all, one single network. I cannot have different networks. I cannot manage, maintain, and spend money on many different networks at the same time. Containerized, which allows me to do what you have just seen in the previous video, and based on automation practices, for sure. This leads to resilience. If I can bring up a core network in 6 minutes, well, resilience is assured. If there is a hurricane, if there is an earthquake, if there is any other event, but we have the tools and we have the right techniques to rebuild the network, our resiliency will be significantly higher. And self-healing, which is something that I will not show today, but it's also amazing to see. And all this under an OpEx model, a financial OpEx model that does not impose a burden on the accounts of the operator. Mr. Antonius, chairman of CANTO, said something very crucial in the opening session. Vendors have a responsibility. I really thought he was talking to me. I had met him for the first time in my life a few minutes ago, but I really felt he was talking to me. All these technology tools must be used to bring your communities into 5G in a timely manner at an affordable price. If we do it together, the result is clear, in my opinion. No one will be left behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sergio. And as Sergio says, Citios, Altios, Fortios, faster, higher, stronger. That's actually the theme of the Olympic Games. And it's part of the theme for our Gigabit Society. We're going to take a coffee break now, but it's going to be a special type of coffee break. It's more of a stretch break. So we stretch, get the blood pumping again. If we go and get some coffee, we're going to bring it back quickly because remember, we have a chance of winning the two-night stay at the Bahamar in the Bahamas. So if you leave the room, make sure you swipe your name card because the barcode on it so that you are entered to win. So you can just go take a stretch break. We're going to come back in 10 minutes.